The rain fell hard on the metal roofs of the small colony town. Most people had already locked their doors. The streets empty, except for the sound of water running down the gutters. Daniel was walking back from the mechanic shop, his jacket soaked. When he heard something unusual, it was not the wind, not the rain. It was a soft, weak sound, almost like a kitten's cry. He stopped, listening carefully. There it was again, coming from near the scrapyard at the edge of town. Daniel frowned, thinking it might be an animal caught in the rain. He almost walked away, but something in that sound felt different, like fear mixed with pain. He followed the noise through puddles and mud. The scrapyard was dark, shadows stretching under the dim light of a flickering street lamp. The smell of rust and wet metal filled the air. Daniel's boots crunched over broken parts and wires as he searched. Then he saw her, a small figure crouched between two piles of scrap. Shivering hard, she was no animal. Her skin was pale blue. Her hair, a tangled mess of white strands stuck to her face by the rain. Her eyes, big, silver, and shining even in the dark, looked up at him with pure terror. Daniel froze for a moment. She couldn't be more than 7 or 8 years old. She wore a thin, torn dress that was soaked through, her bare feet muddy and scraped. In her hands, she clutched a dirty, half-torn blanket like it was the only thing she had left in the world. "Hey," Daniel said softly. Kneeling down, she flinched, pressing herself back against the scrap pile. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you," he said. Trying to keep his voice calm, she didn't answer. Maybe she didn't understand his words. Her breathing was fast, her little shoulders shaking from cold. Daniel slowly took off his jacket and held it out. She hesitated, eyes darting between him and the jacket. Then, as if her strength finally gave out, she reached forward. Her fingers were ice cold when they brushed his hand. He wrapped the jacket around her small frame and felt her trembling. "You can't stay out here," he murmured. She looked at him, lips moving as if she wanted to say something. But no sound came. Daniel realized she was too weak, too cold. To speak, he carefully lifted her into his arms. She was light, far too light, like she hadn't eaten in days. As he carried her through the rain, he noticed her eyes kept scanning the shadows. It was like she expected someone or something to appear at any moment, once. She even clung tighter to him when a loud crash echoed from the scrapyard. Daniel glanced back, but saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched stayed with him until they reached his home. Inside, the small cabin was warm compared to the storm outside. Daniel set her down gently on the couch and hurried to the kitchen. He heated some soup and brought a blanket. When he returned, she was sitting very still, watching the door as if ready to run. He handed her the steaming bowl. At first, she just stared at it. Then, with shaking hands, she took a sip. The moment the warm liquid touched her lips, her eyes filled with tears. She drank faster, almost spilling it. As if afraid the food might be taken away, Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. "What happened to you?" he whispered, knowing she wouldn't answer. When she finished, she leaned back, still clutching the bowl like it was treasure. Her breathing slowed, her eyelids heavy, before she fell asleep. She looked at him one last time. There was still fear in her eyes, but also something else, a faint spark of hope. Daniel sat in the chair beside her. The rain outside kept falling, but in that moment, the sound felt far away. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why she was alone in the rain. But one thing was certain: someone, somewhere, had abandoned her. And he couldn't just let her go back into the dark. As she slept, curled under the blanket, Daniel felt a strange sense of responsibility. He had no family, no children of his own. But now there was this small, lost alien girl in his home. And, whether he liked it or not, his life had just changed forever. What he didn't know was that the moment he found her, someone else far away had learned she was still alive, and they would come for her soon. The next morning, the storm was gone, leaving the air cold and fresh. Daniel woke early and found the girl still sleeping on the couch, her small hands gripping the blanket like she feared someone might take it. He made breakfast, the smell of bread and eggs filling the cabin when she woke. Her silver eyes wandered around the room. Curious but cautious, she looked at the food on the table, then at him as if unsure if she was allowed to eat. He sat down, took a bite himself, and nodded for her to join. Slowly she came forward, each step light like she was ready to run. If needed, she sat across from him, copying the way he used the fork. Her movements were careful, almost like she was learning by watching over the next days. Daniel noticed she was quiet but alert. She pointed at objects and waited for him to name them, then repeated the words softly in a strange accent. He called her Leary after hearing her mumble the sound in her sleep. She didn't seem to mind the name, and soon she began answering to it. Weeks passed, and Leary's fear began to fade. She explored the small cabin, touching everything with wide-eyed wonder. Daniel taught her how to make tea, how to sweep the floor, and how to read the simplest words from an old book. In return, she helped in the garden, her small hands pulling weeds and planting seeds with surprising patience. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Leary pointed to herself and said, Leary then pointed to him, tilting her head. Daniel smiled and said, Papa. Her lips curved into a tiny smile, and she repeated the word like it was something precious. It was the first time he heard her voice without fear. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, but it wasn't without shadows. Now and then, Daniel caught her looking out the window at night, her eyes scanning the darkness as if expecting someone. Once, in the market, a stranger in a dark coat glanced at her too long. Leary had gripped his hand so tightly her fingers shook. They left quickly, and Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was searching for her. He decided to keep her existence as private as possible, not out of shame, but because of a deep, unexplainable fear. The colony was full of travelers and traders from many worlds, and not all of them were kind. He avoided visitors, kept the curtains drawn, and told curious neighbors as little as possible. Still, there were moments when the danger felt far away, like when Leary chased the little mechanical bird he had fixed for her, laughing for the first time, or when she fell asleep against his shoulder after a long day in the fields. In those moments, Daniel almost believed she was just an ordinary child, safe and home for good. But one cold night, he was woken by the sound of soft footsteps. He found Leary standing at the door, staring out into the dark forest. Her lips moved, whispering in a language he couldn't understand. When he touched her shoulder, she startled and looked up at him with eyes full of confusion, almost like she didn't know how she had gotten there. Daniel didn't press her for answers. He only carried her back to bed, tucking her in gently. But deep inside, he knew the peace they had found was fragile, and the past she came from would not stay hidden forever. Several months passed, and the winter winds began to bite at the edges of the colony. Leary had grown stronger, her cheeks no longer hollow, her laughter now a part of Daniel's daily life. Yet something about her never stopped pulling at his curiosity. Sometimes she would stare into the fire, her eyes distant, as though she was looking at a place far away. Sometimes her lips would move in that same strange language he couldn't understand, soft and rhythmic like a song. One evening, during a heavy snowfall, Daniel found her asleep at the table, her head resting on an open notebook. She had drawn symbols, intricate curves, and sharp lines, unlike anything he had ever seen. They looked deliberate, like writing, not random shapes. When he gently shook her awake, she quickly closed the notebook, pressing it to her chest. Her silver eyes seemed to plead with him not to ask questions, but Daniel's unease grew. He took a small recording device from his workbench the next time she spoke in her sleep. Her voice was soft but urgent, speaking in long sentences. When morning came, He carried the recording to his friend Jonah, a trader who had once worked with alien diplomats. Jonah listened, his face slowly losing color. He told Daniel the words were in the royal dialect of the Vyari, a language used only by highborns and officials. Jonah's voice lowered as he explained. Leary was saying her full name, and it wasn't just Leary. She had a long title before it, a title belonging to the lost daughter of a Vyari noble who had been presumed dead during the war years ago. That war had ended badly for her family, and if she was truly alive, it meant her existence could shift the balance of power in their empire. Daniel felt the weight of it all settle on his chest. He looked at the little girl who was now playing with her mechanical bird in the corner. She had no idea that her life was anything other than planting seeds and learning new words. He realized that if the wrong people discovered who she was, they wouldn't come to take her home. They might come to silence her forever. That night, Daniel locked the doors twice and kept a rifle within reach. He tried to sleep, but his mind replayed Jonah's warning. The Vyari royal houses were known for their ruthless politics. Blood ties meant little compared to power, and Leary might be seen as a threat rather than a blessing. Snow continued to fall outside. Covering the colony in silence, Leary slept peacefully, unaware that the truth about her past had begun to surface. Daniel sat by the window, staring into the darkness beyond the forest, knowing deep down that someone else, somewhere far from here, would hear whispers of her survival soon, and when they did, they would come. The first signs came quietly, a distant hum in the winter sky that didn't belong to any colony ship. Daniel was chopping firewood when the sound grew louder, deeper, and heavier. He looked up to see a sleek silver craft descending toward the open landing field beyond the forest. It was too advanced for any local trader. Its hull marked with elegant curved symbols he didn't recognize, but somehow knew were important. Leary was on the porch, her eyes fixed on the ship. She wasn't afraid this time, but frozen, her lips parting like she had seen a ghost. Daniel stepped closer to her. "Do you know them?" he asked, but she didn't answer. The ship touched down with a hiss. Snow swirling around its landing struts. A ramp lowered slowly, and then she appeared. The woman was tall, regal, her pale blue skin gleaming under the weak sun. Her hair was the same bright white as Leary's, but braided with silver threads. She wore a long, flowing coat lined with gold stitching. Her silver eyes scanned the surroundings with a sharpness that made Daniel's chest tighten, and when they landed on Leary, something in her expression softened. She stepped forward. Speaking in the same language Daniel had heard in the recordings, Leary blinked, tears filling her eyes. She took a hesitant step, then another, until she was running into the woman's arms. The embrace was tight, desperate, like two souls reunited. After years of believing the other was gone, Daniel watched, a strange mixture of relief and unease twisting inside him. The moment was powerful, but the two guards who stepped out of the ship ruined any sense of peace. They were armored, armed, and scanning the area with cold precision. One of them glanced at Daniel for a moment too long, as if memorizing his face. The woman finally looked at him, her voice accented but clear. "You have cared for my daughter," she said, not as a question, but as a statement. Daniel nodded, unsure what else to do. She stepped closer, her gaze unreadable. "For that, I owe you. But she will come with me now." Leary turned sharply, clinging to Daniel's arm. Speaking quickly in her language, the woman's jaw tightened, and she answered back. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Leary was refusing. The guards shifted uncomfortably, ready to intervene in that tense moment. Daniel realized the woman might love her child, but there was more here than a simple reunion. He could feel it in the way her eyes flicked to the guards, the way they kept glancing toward his home, as if searching for something, whatever her reasons. Daniel knew she wasn't leaving without Leary. and Leary wasn't leaving without a fight. The cold air between them felt heavy, and Daniel had the sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a much bigger storm. That night, the cabin felt smaller than ever. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the walls as Daniel sat at the table. Leary curled up in the chair beside him. Her mother stood by the window, silent, watching the snow fall. The guards had returned to the ship, but Daniel knew they were still close, waiting for her signal. The silence was thick until the woman finally spoke. "In my world, she will have everything." Her voice was calm but firm: education, safety, servants to care for her, and a place of honor in our house. Daniel kept his eyes on the fire. "She already has everything she needs," he said. Quietly, Leary's small fingers tightened around his sleeve. Her mother turned, her gaze sharp. "You cannot keep her hidden forever. They will find out who she is, and when they do, she will be in danger here." Daniel met her eyes. "Or in danger with you." She didn't answer, but the tension in her jaw told him he had struck a nerve. Later, when her mother stepped outside to speak with her guards, Leary whispered to him in broken human words, "Stay, Papa." Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. Daniel felt a knot in his chest. She was old enough to understand that leaving with her mother meant leaving everything they had built together. Her mother returned and knelt in front of her, speaking in their language. The words were soft, almost pleading. Leary listened but didn't move. Finally, she spoke. And even without knowing the language, Daniel could hear the finality in her tone. Her mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She rose, her regal composure unbroken. That evening, Daniel caught sight of her standing alone outside. Her breath a mist in the cold air. She stared at the forest as though weighing a choice. She didn't want to make. The ship's lights glowed faintly in the distance, a constant reminder that she could leave at any moment with her daughter, but she didn't, not yet. And in the quiet that followed, Daniel began to wonder if the choice wasn't only Leary's to make, but her mother's too. The next morning, the forest was too quiet. The usual distant hum of colony machinery was gone, replaced by a heavy stillness that made the air feel colder. Daniel was outside chopping wood when he saw movement near the tree line, not the slow, cautious movement of an animal, but quick shadows slipping between the trees. He went inside and found Leary and her mother speaking in low voices. The moment he closed the door, her mother looked at him sharply. "They're here," she said. Daniel didn't need to ask who. He could see it in her eyes, the enemy faction Jonah had warned him about. Before they could make a plan, a loud crack split the air. The cabin window shattered. Glass scattering across the floor, Leary screamed and ducked behind the table. Daniel grabbed the rifle from the wall, while her mother moved with sudden, frightening speed. Drawing a slender weapon from her coat, figures emerged from the forest, tall, armored. Their helmets smooth and black, they moved in formation, surrounding the cabin. "They won't take her alive," her mother hissed. Daniel's pulse pounded. In his ears, "They won't take her at all," he replied. The first intruder kicked down the door. But before he could raise his weapon, Daniel fired. The sound was deafening in the small cabin, and the man fell. Her mother was already moving. Her strikes precise and lethal. Every time Daniel fired, she was there beside him, covering his blind spots without a word. They fought their way out the back, Leary clinging to Daniel's coat. Snow crunched under their boots as they ran toward the ridge behind the cabin. Energy bolts hissed through the air, melting snow where they struck. Her mother covered them, her weapon flashing bright in the winter gloom. When they reached the ridge, Daniel turned to see two of the attackers closing in. He raised his rifle, but one bolt hit the ground near his feet, sending him stumbling. The other would have reached Leary if her mother hadn't thrown herself in front. The shot glanced off her armor, but the impact knocked her to the ground. Daniel pulled her up, gripping her arm. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw something more than pride and control. He saw fear for her child. They kept moving until the forest swallowed them, the sounds of pursuit fading behind them when they finally stopped. The three of them huddled together in the snow. Breathing hard, the danger wasn't over, but something between them had changed. For the first time, they were not strangers fighting over Leary. They were allies, bound by the same promise to keep her safe, no matter the cost. They didn't return to the cabin until 2 days later. The enemy was gone, their tracks in the snow leading back toward the distant mountains. The place was a mess. The door splintered, furniture overturned, a cold wind moving through the broken windows. Daniel felt a deep ache in his chest, but Leary didn't seem to care about the damage. She just ran to the small corner where her blanket still lay. Clutching it like nothing else in the world mattered, her mother stood in the doorway, silent for a long time. Daniel expected her to say it was over and they would leave at once. Instead, she walked inside, touching the walls as if memorizing them. "You built her a home," she said softly, not looking at him. Daniel shrugged. "I just did what anyone should do." That night, the three of them sat by the repaired fire, the heat from the flames casting a warm glow on their faces. Leary leaned against Daniel while holding her mother's hand. Her mother watched the way. Leary's eyes followed him, the way she smiled when he spoke. There was no mistaking the bond between them. When the fire burned low, her mother finally spoke. "In my world, I have power, soldiers, and wealth." But none of it kept her safe. She turned to Daniel. "You did?" Her gaze softened. "The sharp edge gone. If I take her back, she will be a princess. But she will not be happy." She paused, then added, "So I will stay." Daniel blinked, unsure if he heard her right. "Stay." She nodded. "Here, with both of you. She needs her mother." And her papa Leary's smile was brighter than the firelight. She hugged them both so tightly Daniel thought his chest might burst. Days turned into weeks, and the cabin began to feel different. It wasn't just his place anymore. It was theirs. The repairs were made. Laughter filled the rooms, and sometimes, when the wind howled outside, Daniel would look at the two of them and feel a warmth deeper than the fire. He had found a lost child in the rain, and now, somehow, he had a family, one he never knew he needed, and one he would protect for the rest of his life.